April 8th, 1943. 27,000 feet above the frozen skies of France. On that morning, something changed in aerial warfare forever. A German ace named Rolf Hermischen squinted through his canopy at the approaching American fighters. His radio crackled with laughter from his pilots. They had seen these machines before. Massive, barrel-shaped, ungainly. "Die armies have sent us flying milk bottles," he transmitted, barely suppressing his amusement. But Hermichen's laughter would soon turn to terror, because below him, climbing through the German formation, were 16 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. Not the fragile, nimble fighters the Germans knew. These were something different. Something terrifying. This is the story of how the heaviest, most powerful, most feared fighter aircraft of World War II, the P-47 Thunderbolt, transformed from a laughingstock into a machine that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe. This is the story of 8 50 caliber machine guns, raining 100 rounds per second into the German sky. This is the story of the monster that broke the German war machine. To understand the P-47, you must first understand the desperation that created it. June 1940. German fighters had just swept across France in weeks. The Luftwaffe was unstoppable. The French Air Force was decimated. The British were fighting alone in a darkening sky. In America, military planners were terrified. They had seen what modern air superiority could do. They had watched from across the Atlantic as Germany conquered Europe with air power alone, and America had nothing to match it. The U.S. Army Air Corps sent out urgent specifications. They needed a high-altitude interceptor, something that could climb with the best German fighters, something that could reach the rarefied air where the Luftwaffe's finest couldn't follow. They called Republic Aviation. They called Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian-born designer who understood one thing. Sometimes you don't defeat an enemy by playing their game. You change the game entirely. Kartveli looked at the specifications and made a radical decision. He wouldn't build a lightweight interceptor like the Germans expected. He would build a monster. "It will be a dinosaur," Kartveli admitted to his design team, "but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The man understood something fundamental about air combat that the Germans had overlooked. Weight isn't always a disadvantage. Power can compensate for size. Firepower can compensate for agility. The XP-47B prototype that first flew on May 6th, 1941, shocked everyone who saw it. At 9,900 pounds empty weight, it was a brutish machine. The fuselage was thick, not for comfort, but for protection. Behind the pilot's seat was a 3/8-inch steel plate, enough to stop most bullets from behind. The windscreen was reinforced with half-inch bulletproof glass. The engine was a marvel, a Pratt & Whitney R, 2,800 double wasp, an 18-cylinder radial that produced 2,000 horsepower. That's more power than 3 average cars. But the real genius was the turbo supercharger system, a complex network of ducting that ran through the rear fuselage, powered by exhaust gases. This turbo supercharger did something unprecedented. It delivered sea-level performance at 27,000 feet, where the air was so thin that normal engines gasped for oxygen. German fighters using conventional superchargers couldn't match this. Their power degraded at altitude. The Thunderbolt's power increased. Test pilots approaching the XP-47B for the first time asked the same question verbatim. Does this thing actually fly? The answer was yes. And it flew like nothing else in the world. But flying the P-47 was like strapping yourself to a locomotive that didn't want to cooperate. Major Hubert "Hubby" Zemke was a veteran pilot, a hard man, the kind who had seen everything. When his 56th Fighter Group received P-47 seconds in late 1942, he immediately despised them. Between September 1942 and January 1943, his unit lost 18 pilots and 41 aircraft in training accidents. The Thunderbolt ground looped on landing the tail, would suddenly swing sideways without warning, and the aircraft would cartwheel. Pilots were being killed in their own base. On takeoff, the torque from that massive propeller would roll the aircraft violently to one side if the pilot wasn't aggressive with correction. Several pilots died before takeoff, and the diving characteristic was dangerous beyond imagination. The P-47 wanted to dive. It dove with an enthusiasm that pilots had never experienced. At altitude, as it dove, the air got thicker, and shock waves formed on the wings. The control surfaces would freeze. The stick would go solid. Pilots discovered they had unlocked a phenomenon called compressibility, and it was killing them. But those who survived the training learned something. The P-47 wasn't just an aircraft. It was a weapon system. And once you understood how to use it, it became unstoppable. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma, described his first successful flight. It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. The power was unbelievable. You didn't fly it. You aimed it. Johnson would become one of America's top aces, with 27 confirmed victories. But first, he had to learn that the P-47 didn't ask for finesse. It demanded respect. And it demanded that you use it differently than every other fighter in the world. When the P-47 seconds flew their first combat missions in April and May 1943, every German prejudice seemed confirmed. The Thunderbolt couldn't turn with the Focke-Wulf 190. Its wings were too large, its fuselage too thick, its weight too great. In a turning fight, it was like trying to pirouette in a tank. It couldn't climb with the Messerschmitt 109 at medium altitudes. The 109 had a better power-to-weight ratio, better agility, better tactical options. And at low altitude, the P-47 was vulnerable. It climbed at an anemic 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, slower than almost every German fighter. The Luftwaffe quickly developed tactics to exploit these weaknesses. Attack from below, force the American heavy fighters into a turning fight where agility matters more than firepower. Use the 109's superior climb rate to escape before the Thunderbolts could close to firing distance. Hauptmann Josef Pips Priller, commanding officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, reported to headquarters after his first encounter with genuine contempt in his voice. The new American fighter is meat for the slaughter. It flies like a truck, turns like a freight train, and climbs like a pregnant cow. Our boys are calling them Indiana fat targets, pretending to be warriors. The statistics seem to confirm this assessment. In their first month of operations, American fighter groups lost 14 Thunderbolts for only 3 confirmed German kills. The RAF, watching from their Spitfire squadrons, quietly suggested the Americans might reconsider their choice of mount. British pilots joked that the best evasive maneuver in a P-47 was to unstrap and run around the roomy cockpit. But something strange was happening beneath these statistics the German intelligence completely failed to understand. The P-47 seconds that were shot down were coming back with damage that should have disintegrated any other aircraft. One Thunderbolt returned from a May 4th mission with 21 cannon holes and over 100 machine gun strikes. The fuselage looked like Swiss cheese. Any Messerschmitt or Spitfire with that damage would have been burning wreckage on the ground. But the P-47? It flew. The reason was elegantly simple. The Thunderbolt's massive radial engine lacked vulnerable coolant systems. German fighters used liquid-cooled engines sleek and efficient, but a single bullet through a coolant line meant catastrophic overheating and engine seizure. The P-47's air-cooled double WASP engine had no coolant lines. You could shoot it full of holes, and it would keep running. More significantly, and more terrifyingly, when P-47 seconds got their guns on target, the results were apocalyptic. The Thunderbolt carried 8 Browning, 50 caliber machine guns. That's 3,400 rounds of ammunition total. At convergence distance, typically 300 yards, all 8 guns' ballistic paths intersected in a zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything caught in that zone faced 100 half-inch projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. For comparison, a German Messerschmitt 109 carried 2 rifle-caliber machine guns. A Focke-Wulf 190 carried 4 cannon with limited ammunition, maybe 150 rounds each. The American pilot could maintain sustained fire for over 30 seconds. That was an eternity in aerial combat. When a P-47 got its guns on target, aircraft didn't just go down, they disintegrated. The event that would begin changing German perceptions occurred on June 26, 1943, over Forges-les-Eaux, France. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron was flying a P-47 on his 15th combat mission. His formation of 48 Thunderbolts was returning from escort duty when they were bounced by 16 Focke-Wulf 190 seconds from Nye. Jagdgeschwader 26, led by Hauptmann Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland, the younger brother of the famous Adolf Galland. The Germans executed a perfect attack, diving from the sun with overwhelming speed advantage. Johnson, flying at the rear of the formation, was caught in the crossfire of multiple attackers. His aircraft took catastrophic damage in the first seconds of combat. 21 20mm cannon shells exploded across his Thunderbolt. The canopy shattered. Hydraulic fluid sprayed into the cockpit, mixing with oil and smoke. The engine cowling was torn away. Fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson was wounded in the nose and leg by shrapnel and bullet fragments. He tried to bail out, but the canopy was jammed. A 20mm shell had exploded in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying aircraft at 27,000 feet over occupied France, with German fighters still on his tail. What happened next defied every assumption about combat damage tolerance. Despite having no forward visibility through the oil-covered windscreen, a barely functioning engine that shook violently, and controls that responded only intermittently, Johnson managed to level the aircraft and point it toward England. The P-47 continued flying with damage that would have reduced any other fighter to falling debris. Then it got worse. A lone Focke-Wulf 190, flown by an unknown pilot from ToW, JG-26, discovered the crippled Thunderbolt, limping toward the channel at less than 170 miles per hour. This German pilot had found wounded prey. What followed was one of the most extraordinary encounters in aerial warfare history. The German pilot positioned himself behind Johnson's P-47 and opened fire with his 4 20mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. Johnson, unable to evade, could only huddle behind his armor plate and pray. The Thunderbolt absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load. The German ran out of cannon rounds. He repositioned and came in again, this time firing only his machine guns. The Thunderbolt kept flying. The German pilot pulled alongside, staring in complete disbelief at the flying wreck. Johnson could see his face clearly blonde, young, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion, to something approaching fear. The German repositioned one more time and emptied his remaining machine gun ammunition into the Thunderbolt. Still, it flew. He pulled alongside again, shook his head in apparent amazement, gave what appeared to be an informal salute, and peeled away. He was out of ammunition. Johnson's P-47 landed at Manston Airfield with its engine failing on the runway. Ground crews stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. One cannon shell had exploded inches from Johnson's head. Another had detonated against the armor plate behind his seat. The engine had taken direct hits. The control cables were partially severed. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural spine of the fuselage, were shot completely through. Yet the aircraft had brought him home. The survival of Johnson's aircraft sent shockwaves through both air forces. American engineers studying the wreckage realized they had underestimated their own creation. The P-47 wasn't just tough, it was nearly indestructible. German intelligence, receiving combat reports from Jagdgeschwader 26, initially refused to believe it. No aircraft could absorb that much punishment and still fly. But testimony from multiple pilots confirmed the impossible. The Thunderbolt had taken everything the Luftwaffe's best fighter could deliver and survived. More importantly, German commanders realized something troubling. If their best pilots, flying their best fighters, couldn't kill this American machine, what did that mean for the war? The answer would terrify them. By July 1943, American pilots were learning to exploit the P-47's true strengths. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemke, the 56th Fighter Group commander, had discovered the secret through brutal trial and error. He issued new tactical orders that contradicted everything pilots had learned about fighter combat. Don't turn with them. Don't climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your power. Use your guns. The Thunderbolt's massive weight, initially seen as a disadvantage, became a weapon. In a dive, nothing could catch it. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could reach 550 miles per hour faster than any German fighter could achieve, even in a vertical dive. This speed could be converted to altitude in a zoom climb that left pursuing fighters helplessly behind. Captain Walker Bad Maherin, who had become one of the first American aces in Europe, developed what became known as the boom and zoom tactic. Pilots called it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. The concept was simple, but devastating. P-47 formations would climb to 30,000 feet, higher than German fighters could effectively operate. When Luftwaffe fighters appeared below, the Thunderbolts would roll inverted, drop their noses, and dive. They would reach speeds that made deflection shooting impossible for the defending Germans. At the bottom of these dives, the American heavy machine guns would speak. German pilots who survived described it as facing a wall of lead, the combined firepower creating an impenetrable zone of destruction. Aircraft caught in this convergence pattern didn't just fall, they disintegrated. The true revelation of American firepower came during the August 17th, 1943 dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg, the deepest penetration into Germany attempted to that date. This mission would demonstrate both the P-47's limitations, its range, even with drop tanks, couldn't reach deep into Germany, and its terrifying effectiveness when employed properly. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, encountered a formation of Messerschmitt 110 destroyer aircraft. These twin-engine German fighters were heavily armed with cannon and rockets, specialized bomber killers. Less maneuverable than single-engine fighters, but more heavily armed. Schilling's flight of 4 Thunderbolts rolled into their attack dive from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a gunner in one of the May 110 seconds who survived, later recounted in a POW interrogation. The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven. I opened fire at 800 meters. Good hits. I saw them strike the fighter's wing. The P-47 didn't even wobble. Then he fired. The aircraft ahead of us simply came apart, not shot down, destroyed. Wings separated from fuselage, tail severed, the crew compartment shredded into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a 110 became nothing. 8 Messerschmitt 110 seconds were destroyed in less than a minute. German pilots had never experienced such concentrated firepower. Each P-47 carried 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, weighing nearly 900 pounds. At convergence distance, typically 300 yards, all 8 guns created a ballistic kill zone roughly 6 feet in diameter. Anything in that zone faced 100 half-inch projectiles per second, each traveling at 2,900 feet per second. The ammunition itself was a revelation of American industrial capacity. While German fighters struggled with limited cannon ammunition, typically 120 to 200 rounds for a 20mm weapon, American pilots could maintain fire for over half a minute. The standard combat load, mixed armor-piercing incendiary, armor-piercing incendiary tracer, and standard ball ammunition in patterns designed to both destroy and ignite. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gaby Gabreski, who would become the top American ace in Europe with 28 victories, described the effect. When you hit them with all 8, they don't just go down, they explode. I saw 109 literally cut in half, the tail falling one way, the nose and wings another. The pilot never knew what hit him. By September 1943, the Luftwaffe was discovering another horrifying reality about the P-47. Its performance improved dramatically with altitude, while German fighters suffered. The turbo-supercharged double Wasp engine maintained its rated power output up to 30,000 feet. The P-47's service ceiling exceeded 42,000 feet. German fighters, relying on single-stage or two-stage mechanical superchargers, saw their performance degrade significantly above 25,000 feet. The BMW 801 engine in the Focke-Wulf 190, powerful at medium altitudes, was gasping for oxygen at 28,000 feet. Oberleutnant Hans Philipp, one of Germany's most successful aces, with 206 victories, encountered this reality fatally on October 8th, 1943. Leading Jagdgeschwader won against a B-17 formation at 28,000 feet over Bremen. Philipp found his Focke-Wulf 190A sluggish and unresponsive in the thin air. When P-47 seconds of the 56th Fighter Group dove on his formation from 32,000 feet, the German fighters were sitting ducks. Robert Johnson, now an experienced combat pilot on his way to ace status, was flying at 31,000 feet when he spotted Philipp's distinctive Focke-Wulf with its elaborate nose art. Johnson's combat report was clinical. Opened fire at 300 yards, 30-degree deflection, observed strikes along entire fuselage. Enemy aircraft exploded. No parachute observed. Philipp's death sent shockwaves through the Luftwaffe. If one of their best, a man who had survived over 500 combat missions on both the Eastern and Western fronts, couldn't survive against the Thunderbolts, what chance did average pilots have? In January 1944, a new variant of the P-47 began arriving in England that would complete the transformation from laughingstock to nightmare. The P-47D-22 featured a Hamilton standard hydromatic propeller with massive paddle blades 13 feet in diameter, with broad chord blades that bit into the air like oars. The improvement in climb rate was immediate and dramatic. Where earlier Thunderbolts had climbed at 2,200 feet per minute at sea level, the paddle blade variants could achieve 3,000 feet per minute, matching or exceeding German fighters at most altitudes. The massive propeller also improved acceleration, allowing P-47 seconds to build energy faster in level flight. Hauptmann Heinz Noker of Jagdgeschwader 11, a veteran with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new variants in February 1944 during a bomber interception near Hanover. He wrote in his combat diary with an almost defeated tone, "The fat American fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation near Hanover, expecting our usual advantage. They turned into us and climbed with us. When we tried to disengage, they followed us up to 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart, nothing left but smoke and fragments. These are not the same machines we laughed at last year. The paddle blade propeller did more than improve performance. It changed the sound of the Thunderbolt. The distinctive thundering roar created by the blade tips reaching supersonic speeds could be heard from miles away. German ground troops reported being able to identify approaching P-47 seconds by sound alone, a deep, threatening rumble that meant death from above. They began calling it Donnerschlag, thunderclap. That sound would haunt German soldiers for the rest of the war. By March 1944, P-47 seconds, equipped with external fuel tanks, could escort bombers deep into Germany. The standard configuration carried two 108-gallon wing tanks, or a 75-gallon belly tank, extending range to over 1,000 miles. With the paddle blade propeller providing improved performance even when loaded with external tanks, Thunderbolts could fight on equal terms immediately after dropping their tanks. The Luftwaffe's response was to concentrate on the bombers, hoping to inflict enough losses to force a halt to the American daylight bombing campaign. But this required flying through the P-47 escort screen, an increasingly suicidal proposition. Major Gunther Roll, one of Germany's top aces, with 275 victories, mostly on the Eastern Front, survived an encounter with P-47 seconds on March 6, 1944, that left him badly wounded. He later recalled in a post-war interview with vivid clarity, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the Sunday. Someone laughed and said, 'Here come the flying pigs.' Nobody was laughing 30 seconds later. They came down like an avalanche, faster than we could react. The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters just gone, transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire. Getting caught in that stream meant instant death." German pilots developed a grudging respect that bordered on fear for the big American fighters. They had learned, through bitter experience, that the P-47 Thunderbolt was something entirely different from any aircraft they had encountered. June 6th, 1944, D-Day. The transition from air superiority to ground attack began in earnest as the Allies prepared for the invasion of France. Over 500 P-47 seconds provided air cover for the invasion, creating an impenetrable umbrella over the beaches. The Thunderbolt's heavy machine gun battery proved equally effective against ground targets. The standard armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate the top armor of most German vehicles. The sheer volume of fire could destroy soft targets in seconds. A 2-second burst put 160 half-inch projectiles into a target area the size of a truck. German fighters attempting to reach the landing zones were massacred. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer of Jagdgeschwader II, one of only 3 German pilots to reach the beaches that day, reported with despair. The sky belonged to the Americans. Thunderbolts were stacked from sea level to 30,000 feet. We tried to break through at dawn with 12 fighters from our Group A. I was the only one to return. The P-47 seconds were waiting at every altitude. You couldn't climb over them, couldn't dive under them. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminum rain. The P-47 seconds didn't just achieve air superiority. They achieved air dominance, complete control of the skies. In the weeks following D-Day, P-47 seconds systematically destroyed German movement in daylight. The statistics were staggering. In June alone, 9th Air Force Thunderbolts claimed 651 locomotives, 3,847 trucks, 512 tanks and armored vehicles, and 4,553 horse-drawn vehicles destroyed. The Wehrmacht was forced to move only at night, severely hampering their ability to respond to Allied advances. The Germans tried everything to counter the Thunderbolt threat. They reinforced vehicle armor. They deployed more anti-aircraft guns. They developed new camouflage techniques. Nothing worked. The P-47's combination of speed, armor, and firepower made them nearly unstoppable. Even the feared 88mm flak guns struggled to track the fast-moving fighters at low altitude. It was the addition of bombs and rockets that transformed the P-47 into a true multi-role monster. The D-25 variant could carry two 1,000-pound bombs under the wings and a 500-pound bomb under the fuselage, a bomb load equal to early war medium bombers. Later variants added zero-length rocket stubs for 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, each equivalent to a 105mm artillery shell. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzergrenadier Regiment during the Normandy campaign, experienced P-47 ground attacks firsthand. They came in low, so low you could see the pilots' faces. The sound was terrifying, engines roaring, rockets screaming, then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass. The psychological effect on the men was devastating. They called them Jarbos fighter bombers, but these were something beyond that. They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers. The P-47 had evolved. It had transcended its original role as a fighter. It had become something more, a weapon system that could do everything: shoot down enemy aircraft, escort bombers, attack ground targets, carry bombs and rockets. It was the closest thing to the perfect all-purpose combat aircraft. While devastating Europe, the P-47 was simultaneously proving its worth in the Pacific theater. The 348th Fighter Group, operating from New Guinea, discovered that the Thunderbolt's qualities were perfectly suited to the vast distances and harsh conditions of the Pacific War. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who encountered P-47 seconds over New Guinea, later wrote with a mixture of respect and fear, "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart." The P-47 Newtons, developed specifically for the Pacific, featured increased fuel capacity with wet wings holding 93 gallons each, extending range to 2,350 miles. This variant would escort B-29 seconds to Japan, proving that the short-legged fighter of 1,943 had evolved into a true long-range weapon capable of projecting American power across entire oceans. By the end of World War II, the P-47 Thunderbolt had flown over 546,000 combat sorties. It had destroyed over 3,500 enemy aircraft in the air and over 4,000 on the ground. It had carried pilots through the worst air war in human history and brought most of them home alive. The monster that German pilots had laughed at on April 8th, 1943, had become the aircraft they feared most. Not because it was the most maneuverable, not because it was the fastest, but because it was unstoppable. 8 50 caliber machine guns, 3,400 rounds per engagement, 100 rounds per second. Speed, power, armor, and firepower combined into one devastating package. The P-47 Thunderbolt had transformed aerial warfare. It had proven that brute force, properly applied, could defeat tactical brilliance. It had shown the world that industrial capacity and engineering excellence could build machines that changed history. It had broken the Luftwaffe not through luck or chance, but through systematic, relentless superiority. The German aces who had laughed at the flying milk bottles had learned a lesson that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. Never underestimate industrial capacity. Never underestimate American firepower. And never, ever laugh at the P-47 Thunderbolt.